Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So we've got another curation video here. I've spent the best part of my Sunday afternoon scouring YouTube, poe.ninja, and everything else to try and find some builds for you that you could consider for League Start. Now, obviously, some of these builds aren't the fastest to League Start with, whereas there is one that's pretty consistent, but its endgame just needs a bit of adjustment, and the creator is accommodated for that. So just keep that in mind when you approach these. The idea behind this video is to give you some ideas of what you could play that will still work. So I've went through and had a look at all the patch notes for every one of these. For the builds that are mine, I'm servicing them currently and or have serviced them. And the last one is just for a lot of fun. So it's not necessarily the best League Starter build, but also the video series that's been provided, and I might add it's been done in 5 parts by the creator, and he is a pretty good creator, covers off from League Start with no gear all the way through, and it is a pretty suicidal build is probably the best way to put it. But anyway, I know a few people were asking for something like that from the community, so I thought I'd oblige. Anyway, let's get into this guide. This is 5 more possible builds that you could play in the 3.23 League. And obviously, just keep in mind, make sure you read the builds, make sure you go through and do a bit of research. These builds won't play themselves for you. You have to play the builds. You're in control of the mouse at the end of the day. Anyway, let's get into the video. Okay, so the first build off the ranks here is actually from me. And this one was a build that I made in 3.19. I then reserviced the build in 3.21 because it was still fully viable, and then I'm reservicing it again for 3.23 because Crackling Lance is actually being buffed, and now you get 10% more damage with hits and elements per intensity, and you stack intensity per, the longer you hold the skill down. So instead of shock. So that's a pretty good improvement. So this skill is actually going to ramp up in damage further than what it is. Now, it doesn't use any items that have been hit by the nerf hammer this league. And it doesn't use a skill that's been hit by the nerf hammer, so it's pretty damn good. Now, the other thing with this build is it does use leadership's price when you get it to endgame, and usually that's about like day 2 or 3 if you're like an average player like I am. If you want to build that's going to be a lot faster on day 1, dropping pinnacle bosses, and as when I say that, like dropping juiced up pinnacle bosses or like Uber Elder and stuff like that, this isn't going to be the build for you. This build is very tanky. I took it down to about 500 depth roundabouts when I did play it in 3.19, and to date there's been no major changes to the PoE, the pathing tree or anything like that. And to the point with the wildwood ascendancies that are coming out, this build is actually going to get more powerful, and that's on top of the existing power spike that you're going to get. The other thing I'll add too is if you have a look on poe.ninja, there was still a ton of people playing different variations of Crackling Lance last league because it was such a strong build, and you can get this build up into the hundreds of millions of DPS and doing like 20 sort of casts per second and all sorts of weird and wacky and wonderful stuff like that. This is just one that is really strong. It will get you through the campaign, and you can pretty much start leveling it up straight away. And I've accommodated for early leveling and all that sort of jazz. I've provided a leveling tree with a scuffed 5 link and everything else. Because people get upset if you put things on a 6 link or even on a 5 link, because then they want to see 4 link. But anyway, I digress. So I had this marked, and I'm doing a bit of a different thing with these videos now, as its survivability is hurt me plenty. I can take it, which basically means it can take a few punches to the face. It's pretty tanky. Early leveling is slow and steady wins the race, so it's not the fastest leveler in the game, but it's consistent and it'll get you to end game pretty well. And the end game was reach 500 depth, and for anyone who's played Delve on the average build, 500 depth is pretty damn good if you're not planning on playing a Delve specific character and going deeper. So that's my first build idea that I'm going to give you that you could have a look into for the 3.23. Okay, so the next build that I'm going to feature here is another one that I put together last league, and just for a bit of benchmarking, I've actually also provided Asmodeus's tree in the description below as well, so you could go to either or. It'll tell you how to play the build. Basically, Wave of Conviction is you apply ignites as you run around and just melt enemies, and you get Wave of Conviction pretty early on when you're leveling as well. So it's a pretty lucrative skill to start with. Usually, you just start with something like Rolling Magma, and then you proc ignite, and then you continue from that point. being the Elementalist, also you get like 100% ignite pretty early on once you do your first lab, and you just walk through the game. Now, with my version of the build, I just stack an early Immortal Flesh, and these are usually like, tops of 6 Chaos or whatever as you're leveling. And I think you get access to it around level 40 to 50. And basically, you just out regenerate any incoming damage enough so that you can just walk through the remaining, like, 5 acts or so. But that being said, also looking at the patch notes as well, it looks like there's been a bit of a scaling buff to the skill, so it applies for a longer period of time now. And also, instead of its quality just giving you flat elemental damage, it gives you anywhere up to 15% of enemy elemental resistances pens. So that means they're fire resistances. So essentially, it's gotten a little bit of a buff. And that being said, there are 2 routes that you can go with this build when you get to endgame. You can either take it down the path of doing like a Chaos Inoculation, Wave of Conviction build, which I've put in the leveling guide as well, or you can go down the route of playing my Blackflame Detonate Dead Elementalist, which for anyone who follows my channel was a ridiculously good build, and it just pushed down a delve for as far as you wanted to go, and that was without anything like Mage Blood or anything like that. Super good build, super consistent, and a lot of fun. And that's what this build gives you access to. Now, also on top of that, the Wildwood Ascendancy is going to give you an increase in power as well. But I will say this, you will sort of run into some early game squishiness with different builds like this. So just bear that in mind. But once you get an Immortal Flesh belt, you can pretty much get around that very quickly. And there's some other things that you can do, like stacking more armor on your shield and things like that, which will progress you very quickly through the campaign. But overall, this is a relatively painless build to play, and it just melts everything early in the game. Now, as far as the rating that I give this build on survivability, it's basically just don't hit me too hard. It's about middle tier on defensiveness. It's not the most defensive early on, but if you go the CI route, it becomes an absolute bloody Hank the Tank sort of Elementalist build. And then if you do go the Detonate Dead route, it just absolutely nukes maps, and you can take hits to the face all day because you run Aegis Aurora on it. Its early leveling is pretty quick, so fire fixes all, as would be said in the Warhammer 40k universe. And the end game's competent. It's not by far the best build that you will take into the end game, but it does have a pretty good level of scaling in the end game, and you can also respec from that point too. So if there's a better build that you want to play, the Witch is a really good ascendancy, or the Witch is a really good class with ascendancies that have a lot of lucrative options. So this will get you through the campaign quickly, so you can play the build that you really want to play later down the track in the first few days or the first week or whatnot. Okay, build number 3 that we're going to cover off on here is actually done by Chronic Painless, and we're just going to go OG, Coldblade, Vortex, Elementalist, or Occultist. So he's actually got a really good guide. It's both written on the PoE forums, and also within the path of building. He's got a full notes section going through pretty much everything you need to know about Cold BV. Now the big thing here is obviously Heat Shiver got nerfed. That being said, his 2 videos that I've linked, the one being a cover off of 3.23, he's basically worked through, everything that you might be concerned about around some of the patch notes and changes to Cold BV, mainly the impact from Heat Shiver and how that could potentially be mitigated. So it's worth checking out his video. The build definitely will do plenty of DPS, like that's a given. It's going to be fine, and it's going to be really good in the league content as well, where you just want to run around and farm the hell out of stuff. So that's a given. Now, essentially, he's got a full league starter sort of leveling guide here as well. So it gives you all the trees from level 9 throughout, the level of investment, as you can see in the background video too. So there's a fair bit of information to work through. So check out his channel, check out his videos. And have a bit of a look at this one. And that being said, also bearing in mind that where there are nerfs, there are buffs with the Wildwood Ascendancies, and he covers off on that in his discussion in his build video as well for League Start 2 that he put out in the last day. So definitely a build worth looking at. Definitely still a good build. Ultimately, there's probably going to be someone here that's going to throw salt at the comments because it has Heat Shiver, but yeah, that's going to be fine. Like, there'll be other ways to get around it. So the other thing too is he's got a Discord channel, so if you want to talk BV or anything like that, go to his Discord, have a look, and then yeah, enter into the chat in there, and then yeah, you might find out some interesting information about Cold BV. Okay, so just on the points of survivability, like it's pretty okay. It's definitely not one of my builds, but this BV characters are usually made for quick mapping and running through, so it's a good build to play early in League for map progression and things like that. And if you don't like it later down the track, if you don't want to continue to scale it, you can take it a different route because it is, again, using the Witch. So the Witch is a pretty lucrative class that you could play on a ton of different characters, especially with the new skills that are coming out. Now, early leveling, it's generally pretty quick, and basically just run through the campaign. Once you get to the point where you can sustain BV and it's comfortable to play, then it just becomes an easy build to play to get to, you know, Act 10 and kill Kitava and then straight into maps. Now, as far as endgame, it's mainly made for mapping, this particular build. It's not really made for a great deal of other things. Like, you're not going to be going and smashing bosses with this build, and you can scale it that way. Any build can get to that point, or most builds can, but this build's going to be for quickly blazing through maps, collecting loot, and then running back out. So that's basically where we're at with Cold BV. And he makes a comment about freeze fence as well, which basically means while you're still scaling up your defense, scale up your ability to freeze enemies, and that's the best defense that Blade Vortex, cold version of Blade Vortex, has, which is you freeze the enemies before they have a chance to hit you. So that's also another thing to keep in mind. Anyway, this is build number 3 that I'd recommend for the 3.23 League to try out or have a look into further if you're still sort of considering what build to play for League start. Okay, so for build number 4 is one that I put an endgame version together for at the end of 3.22 for the basically the shits and giggles, and it just so happened to be an absolutely unbelievable build to the point where I got it to about 24 million DPS with Incinerate and was just melting bosses, running around in Delve, basically face tanking Crystal Kings and just horizontal running 500 depths to just hunt down Kings, and that was without Mage Blood or anything like that. This is just stupid. So I came up with this build basically because I got bored and I thought, oh yeah, I wonder if Incinerate works, and it did really well. And so in the description below, you'll be able to see links to the endgame version of the build and everything, basically all the information you'll need. So the question came to me from the community, okay, can you make that build a League start viable build? And what was really funny is it scales really well. So I did a test on it, and you'll see in the video below, I basically mapped out every single act from Act 1, and you can get Incinerate by the end of Act 1, by the way, and then basically pushed all the way through the campaign, no issues whatsoever. Some people who did co-test it reported it being slightly squishy, and that's okay. Just requires a bit of balancing as you go. So it did level through in about 6.5 to 7.5 hours in my playthrough, and that was just a raw run on one of the special events that came out at the end of 3.22. So if you're gonna look at playing this build, definitely have a look at that guide in depth. And just make a call on whether or not you're comfortable with trying a skill that you haven't tried before. And I just put a warning there that some people will like this type of playstyle, some don't, because it does require a slower playstyle. So you'll be moving, you stand still, you cast, hold down, and blow everything up, and then move on. Now, the other thing that did hit this build, which did drop its damage a bit, and the high end only gets to like 24 to 26 million DPS, which honestly is still stupid, and I had it sitting at about 30 mil at level 100, and it can go down to about 20 mil at probably level 95. It's the change to the Relicash boots. Now, that no longer works the same way as what it previously did per the patch notes. Those boots no longer give you maximum minimum charges, which meant you got 3 charges of every type, or 3 charges based on your maximum charges. So in the absence of that, I've went back, revised the mid-game HP POB, and revise the full endgame CI version of the POB. So that'd be the one that you'd want to target at the very end. And basically just switched out the mid-game for Crafted Boots or Legacy of Fury, and the endgame will just be Legacy of Fury is the best in slot item to put in there. Or if you want to craft boots that give you more energy shield, you could do that. But from a league start scenario, there's no changes to the league start tree. Basically, the best way to mitigate damage early is just getting an Immortal Flesh belt and just out regenerate. This thing has a ton of health regeneration, so it does get tanky earlier on very quickly. The endgame version, or the mid to endgame version, will use a Dawnbreaker shield. It gets to a good amount of armor, and I think it hits about 150 to 160k effective hit pool, and that's based on a HP version. You get to about 10 to 12 million DPS with that, without having to even consider going CI, which on any build's really, really good. It has high regen, pretty tanky as well. Now, on top of that, just a few touch points on this too. Its boss damage is pretty good. I was really surprised with Incinerate, like it was just stupidly good. It is 100% crit, or at least 70 to 80% crit, so it does a lot of crit. And now with the buff that was put to Incinerate, we get +2 stages, which used to be the Helm enchant that was harder to get. That's built into the stock gem, which is insane. So that +2 change in the endgame build accumulated to about 2.3 to 3 million DPS, which is pretty damn good. So the change to the skill gem is actually significant in a way that it makes the build even more playable earlier on, especially from a league starting scenario. So it makes it more viable. Now the other thing is we don't know what variations of the build can exist with the was it transmuted gems. So this could change and go crazy even beyond this point. And the most important thing about this build is this channeling tree will work on pretty much any channeling skill with a few adjustments for the affinity or the elemental type. And one thing that I'll be looking at doing with this tree is seeing if I can make a Divine Ire build work with it, because it realistically should work with Divine Ire considering the buffing that's been put to Divine Ire. But we'll find that out the hard way when the POB comes out. So overall, really, really solid build. Some people will try and call this bait. Well, I tested it and played it through, and it's not bait. And the footage you can see is scuffed gear running 3 and 4 tier 3 and 4 maps with no real leveling. One thing that you will also notice is earlier on, until you get convergence, your AoE is a little bit lower. Once you get convergence, your AoE is like screen level melting. So it gets insane. Anyway, check the build out, see if you like it. It's an interesting, different take on a build, and it hasn't been touched negatively by the patch notes except for one item in the game. Now, as far as survivability, to the point where you get it to the CI variation of the build, it's basically like where is all, like, and that's what I was doing with it, hunting Crystal Kings with it. It was ridiculous. Early leveling, like, it's good. It's not the best early leveler, but it's not bad, and it's a lot of fun. I didn't have any issues with bosses, and from Act 1 all the way through, I pretty much just melted everything, and it was great. Just defenses, you just need to scale as you go. And the end game was unexpectedly strong, and I was really glad I got the pleasure of putting this build together, because basically no one was playing Incinerate, and Incinerate's an amazing skill, just a diamond in the rough. But yeah, have a look at it, see what you think, have a look at the guides. If you don't like it and it's not for you, that's fine. If you want something a little bit faster where you don't stop and start and whatnot, then there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to try something new, then follow the guide, see how you go, give it a test run, and yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, so the last one is actually going to be just the stupidest one, and I'm probably going to get the most dislikes on this video for this part of the video, but whatever. It's Flicker Strike by freaking Mageblood. He did a 0 to Hero series from the start of League, last League for 3.22, where he basically took it with no currency all through the game, leveled it up. He shows that in 5 videos, which are like 6 minutes long, and honestly, his videos are so easy to watch because they're just amusing. But yeah, if you want to play a ridiculous build and just have a lot of fun, and you're not worried about dying a lot, Flicker Strike's gonna be the build for you to start with. And as you can see in Magefist videos, and obviously he's played a lot of Flicker Strike, he would know he managed to start it from, you know, Act 1 all the through to, you know, end game, and then, you know, scaled the hell out of it. You'll see a POB for each progress of you know, update of the build. So the 4 primary parts are his main 4 parts of the build, where he basically, you can see the progress he makes at each step. And he does start off on an Oris Sacrifice setup, and for anyone who knows what that is, for the elemental damage that you output, you then generate Frenzy Charges, which is what sustains Flicker Strike. But that being said, he does switch to a pure physical version with an axe, and it just goes and pops off ridiculously. This is a Slayer build, so it's one of the few times I'll put a Slayer build in. But it's a build if you want to have a lot of fun, you want to see your screen explode, and you want a bit of frustration trying to figure out how to get its damage to scale. That being said, like if you just watch his videos, you'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly. And there's other resources out there for it. But yeah, you always see these Flicker Strike players with like 40 million, 100 million DPS. This is basically the starting point to be able to get to that. I wanted to include something a little bit more fun. Like, no build you really look at this stage is going to necessarily be absolutely perfect with all of the changes that are being made, besides a few. And you know, for any of those of you who want to try something that they've never played before and want a bit of a challenge, this is for you. If you're new to the game and you've never looked at Flicker Strike or anything before, I wouldn't suggest playing it straight up. But I put it on this list because you can league start it. Magefist has shown that pretty straight up. And also I wanted to annoy the people who'd be like, that's not a league starter build, rah, 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 rah. Anything can be a league starter build if you try hard enough. But at the end of the day, you can play this from league start. It is viable. Its leveling is a little slow though, so just bear that in mind. So for its ratings, survivability wise, it's just straight up suicidal. Like you're gonna flicker in and die. I can guarantee you will die from time to time when you flicker strike earlier on until you build your defenses up. Early leveling, depending on the route you take, if you did start with something like Smite and you scaled that up earlier on, then flicker strike will be easier to approach. Then yes, early leveling will be a little bit slower than other builds, but it's the journey, not the destination in this scenario. And endgame is just hold my drink, basically. Saddle in and just hold the button down and blow up maps, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, I thought I'd put something different in this League Starter curation, and they're possible builds that you can play. And you know what? There's plenty of people that do start Flicker Strike, and why don't we have it in the list? Why don't we have a bit of fun? It's a video game, for God's sake. You know, not everything is about trying to uber beat the market and get the most currency and everything in the first 2 hours of the game. And a lot of players, you know, they'll spend the first week progressing their League Starter, and definitely this is the build more so for them, and for players who just want to have a bit of fun and enjoy the game. Anyway, that's number 5 that I'm going to feature on this list. Okay, so hopefully this list gives you some ideas of what you can play from League Start. This is going to be the last curation I put up for the 3.23 League Start at this stage, and obviously you can see there are a couple of safer options in this list. There are a couple of untested options that, you know, you might want to go and seek a bit more information on, and there's one that's just absolutely nuts, but you know what? It's a game and it's made for fun, and definitely, like, we've got enough days that if you want to pre-run and test out the builds before you start, then by all means go for it. But yeah, otherwise, if you like this video, don't forget to like and sub. Don't forget to follow the Twitch. Definitely invite discussion in the comments. Just keep it clean and be nice to each other. Don't appreciate people coming in and starting arguments. And anyway, until next time, have a good one, and bye.